Buongiorno wine lovers. Welcome to Wine by the Class, where we journey through the diverse and captivating world of regional Italian wines. Italy boasts a rich tapestry of terroirs, grape varietals, and winemaking traditions, from the rolling hills of Tuscany to the sun-drenched vineyards of Sicily. Join me as we uncork the stories behind these exceptional wines, exploring their unique characteristics, food pairings, and the passionate people who craft them. Prepare your palate for an unforgettable experience as we delve into the heart of Italian wine country, one region at a time. Our wine expert, Anthony Verdoni, will guide us. He is a passionate and knowledgeable Italian wine expert with over 50 years of experience, the author of several books, and a deep appreciation for Italy's rich history and diverse wines. Please join me in welcoming Anthony, who will be our guide on this vinous adventure.
Today we're going to talk about Tuscany, but it's only Tuscany Part 1. We really need at least 2 parts. We probably can use 10 parts, but we'll use 1. We'll do it in 2 sessions, and this is Tuscany 1. Why? Because so many Americans visit Tuscany and are familiar with Florence and Siena, Pisa, some of the other places. And almost wherever you go in Tuscany, you're going to find red wines, many of them based on the Sangiovese grape, which has been traditionally associated with Tuscany, even though it grows in a lot of other areas. And at one time, until recently, it was the most widely planted grape variety in Italy. It's been surpassed by Pinot Grigio, which you're familiar with, I'm sure, and a grape you might not be familiar with, the Glera grape. But once you realize that the Glera grape is the grape that makes Prosecco wine, I think you can identify with that. So there's been a real increase in those grape varieties. And Sangiovese since 1990 has dropped about 30% in plantings, but it's still a very, very widely planted, most widely planted red grape variety in all of Italy. Well, what can we tell you about Tuscany? So many things. First of all, it gets its modern name, which is a bit of a distortion from the Etruscans. Since the Etruscans lived there, the first Roman kings were Etruscan kings. Some of the first Roman kings were Etruscan kings. So this is an ancient civilization. We don't know as much about it as we would like, but at any rate, Tuscany gets its name from the Etruscan people. And I always like Tuscany. It's an area where people speak the most beautiful Italian. It's the area of Dante Alighieri. The great Dante wrote in Italian, in Tuscan. It was a big triumph for the vernacular. Instead of writing in Latin or other classical languages, he was writing in the local Tuscan language, Italian. And sometimes people refer to Tuscany as Chianti Shire. And you may have heard that term. It's a British term because so many Brits like to make their way to Tuscany. Many retire to Tuscany. Certainly an awful lot visit the various wineries, olive oil facilities, etc. And it's an area that's known for a lot of art and science. When we think of science, we think of Da Vinci and Galileo, both Tuscans. And when we think of art, of course, Da Vinci, Michelangelo Buonarroti, and Sandro Botticelli are all Tuscan. And you can see many of their artworks, sculptures, etc., in the great art museums in Tuscany. And you may not have heard this expression, Tuscan snow. This is one of the most famous things about Tuscany. It's called Tuscan snow. And as you know, it doesn't really snow a lot in Tuscany. But the snow they're talking about is the dust from marble, because there are marble quarries in Carrara, which is closer to the coast. And this is where Michelangelo and so many of the sculptors got their material for producing great statues. And it's still a big area today, not only for sculpture, but also for marble tables, marble, various things that are made from marble. Okay, it's also an area of great explorers. And I should point out that when they explored, there wasn't in Italy. This was before Italy became a country in the 1860s and thereafter, and these people predate that. So usually, although they were great Tuscan sailors, they sailed for Spain or Portugal or somewhere else, England, etc. But one of them, very famous, is Amerigo Vespucci. And of course, we get our name America because of a mistake in a map. Someone thought that Amerigo Vespucci sort of discovered the New World. He was among the first, but he wasn't the first. But at any rate, we're named America after Amerigo Vespucci. One of my favorites is Giovanni da Verrazzano. I got involved in a little imbroglio years ago because a lot of the signs with Verrazzano's name, because we're so close to the Verrazzano Bridge, Verrazzano Narrows area, they were constantly misspelling his name. And I thought this was insulting. So I used to write to all these people. I never heard from anybody that Verrazzano is spelled with two R's and two Z's, not one Z. There's still some signs on the turnpike, various places that have it with one Z. But we'll accept that. But it should have two Z's. And I like Verrazzano for several reasons, many reasons. But at any rate, there's his family owns a winery in Tuscany called Verrazzano Winery. He himself was from Grape, which is in the Chianti Classico area. And he sailed to the New World several times. It wound up pretty bad for him. He was eventually captured by some cannibal natives who actually killed him and cooked him and ate him. And I always say jokingly, but it's a really bad joke, but I might as well share it with you. I always said that's the first time Italian food was served in the New World. But of course, we don't need a dead explorer to enjoy Italian food. Okay, so what about Tuscany then? It's an area with a lot of rivers, most famous of which is the River Arno, which goes through Florence and then eventually spills out into the Mediterranean Sea. And it's an area with lots of hills and lots of areas where wine is produced. And before talking about the wines, I'd like to mention the food. Okay, I already mentioned the olive oil. Tuscan olive oil is among the most famous in all of Italy. The oil of Umbria is considered very good, which is Tuscany's neighbor to the south. And the very best is considered to be that of around Lake Garda, but we don't get much of that here in the United States. The Germans swoop down into the Verona area and they seem to buy up all of the olive oil in the area. Tuscan cuisine is many things, but one of the things that they say is that it's cucina povera. It's poor cuisine. There's an emphasis on local family dishes. In fact, the Tuscans themselves are called mangiafagioli. They're bean eaters. And the best beans in Italy, probably, although people debate all of this kind of stuff, is from Sodano, which is in Tuscany, very thin skinned, lots of flavor. And if you go and you have a luxurious beefsteak of Fiorentina, a Florentine beefsteak, you might just get a side order of beans. So beans are so famous. Some of the poor soups, reheated soups, there's a ribollita, which is a vegetable soup with stale bread in it, and it's reheated. It's delicious, very substantial. And there's a tomato soup called papa al pomodoro, which is also part of the cucina povera, the poor cuisine. Livorno is famous for caciucco, and there are five C's in the word caciucco because it's traditional to put five different types of fish in it. Okay, so you find seafood stews all over, but the most famous are from Livorno. The McDonald's of Tuscany is Lampredotto, which is made from the stomach, one of the stomachs of a cow. And this is a traditional poor cuisine dish of Tuscany. And you still find it in an awful lot of places. It's usually served with a green sauce, with the salsa verde. Okay. The bread of Tuscany is unsalted, as is true also in Umbria. And the story goes that at one time there was a tax levied on bread. The Tuscans didn't feel like paying the tax, so they stopped putting salt in their bread. Okay. Tuscan food is very highly flavored, and the unsalted bread goes very well with the spicy and salty Tuscan dishes. One use of the Tuscan bread is also in a salad called panzanella, which is a very nice, refreshing summer salad that has some crostini of bread in it. One of the most famous desserts in Italy are the cantuccini, the kind of almond biscotti from the town of Prato, which is just outside of Florence. And these cantuccini, these cookies or biscuits, are eaten together with vin santo, which is the drink of hospitality and dessert drink of Tuscany, and very worth a try. So those are some of the dishes in Tuscany. I'll mention one other and then we'll start to get into the wines. It's about time we start to talk about wine, right? Pappardelle is ribbons, ribbon pastas, the traditional pasta of Tuscany. It's usually served with a tasty sauce, either duck, wild boar, some sort of game. But at any rate, the pappardelle is a traditional local cut. Okay. Now we should tell you about the wines. And most of the wines that we'll be talking about today will have at least some Sangiovese. And some people don't know this, but they do DNA tests on grapes. And they found that the Sangiovese, which goes way back, goes back to Roman times, is actually a cross varietal between the Ciliegiolo, which still grows in Tuscany. It has a cherry flavor to it. Sometimes they make a rosé from it, sometimes used in red wines. But then another grape called the Calabrese Montenuovo. And of course, this grape, as you can tell, comes from Calabria. And when the cross took place, we really don't know. Ampelographers, which are scientists who study grape varieties and vines, are doing DNA testings and trying to find out when this cross could have taken place. Crosses are natural in the growing of grapes, and it could have happened any time in the past 2,000 years or so. So they're investigating it. But it is a cross varietal. And the number one red grape variety in all of Italy grows in many provinces and in many regions. We may talk about that a little later on. It also has many names. For example, when you get to Montalcino, the Sangiovese Grosso grape variety is called the Brunello, and they produce a wine called Brunello di Montalcino, one of the most important wines in all of Italy. Now, if you take that same Sangiovese and you go to the town of Montepulciano, which is close to Umbria, you'll hear the Sangiovese referred to as Brunello Gentile. And if you go to the coast area, not far actually from Rome, straight up from Rome along the coast, you come to an area, Scanzano. And in the Scanzano area, they call the Sangiovese grape the Morellino, the little blackberry, the Morellino di Scanzano. Okay, and it's grown even in Corsica, which is really more Italian than French. I have to put that plug in. The Sangiovese is called Nieluccio. Okay, so Sangiovese is a very versatile chameleon. I call it a chameleon because it seems to be able to be grown almost anywhere in Italy, anywhere in the world, as a matter of fact. And it has a high acidity and moderate tannins, but the tannins are there. It's a versatile grape variety that can produce rustic wines and also very refined wines. It grows in Argentina, in California. It's responsible for what we call the Itals, the California wines based on Italian grapes, probably the number one planted Italian grape variety in California, although they have Grignolino, they have Barbera, they have others as well. But Sangiovese is important. Grows in Romania. Don't ask me how it got there, but it grows in Romania. And it's also a workhorse grape variety in Australia. In Italy, it's produced in 53 provinces, with about another 16 provinces that are starting to plant it. You realize Italy has 200 provinces, so the Sangiovese is planted in 25%, 30% of all the provinces. And it grows in 13 different regions. The regions are like our states. There are 20 regions, and again, Sangiovese is in most of them. Okay, I mentioned that plantings are down since 1990. They're down 30%. They're being replaced largely by Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Syrah, because whereas the original Chianti formula used two white grape varieties, the Malvasia and the Trebbiano, most of the modern Chiantis, Chianti Classicos, use exclusively red grapes. There's no such thing as white Chianti. When I started in the business, there was a wine marketed as white Chianti, but that disappeared with the DOCG laws around 1964 or so. Okay, and Sangiovese is very satisfying wine. It's got nuances of cherries, plums, mulberry, a ruby in color when it's young, and it gets to a garnet color as it ages. And it can age. I've tasted Sangiovese back to 1888. I'll tell you about that a little later on. Okay, one of the things that they do in Chianti, or they're doing it less and less, is they put in, as the wine is fermenting, some unfermented dried grapes. This is called the Governo process. And this was widespread and it's still permitted in Tuscany, but the movement has been away from that. Chianti wine is usually released early, maybe as early as 4 months or 7 months, but it can be held in the winery for a long period of time to be aged for the really special wines. Brunello di Montalcino Reserva, for example, is aged in the cellars for a 5-year period, making it the longest aged Italian red wine, together with Barolo, which is Barolo Reserva is also aged 5 years, and Aglianico del Vulture from Basilicata Reserva is aged for 5 years. And some individual growers may age their wines even longer than that. The alcohol in Chianti and Chianti Classico can be as low as 11.5 or 12%, but we're seeing much more now at 13, 13.5. Have one to show you today that's 15% alcohol. We just want wines with more power, more alcohol in them. We're harvesting the grapes later and getting these really powerful wines that will hold up for a long period of time. Okay, also new zones are being created. Chianti, Tuscany is not a stagnant area. There's a new area in Chianti Rufina, no association with Rufino. Rufina is a zone just a little northeast of Florence, and one of the best zones, by the way, for producing Chianti. They call it Chianti, Chianti Rufina Reserva. The two great producers of that area, the two that we might know, are Frescobaldi and Selva Piana, who make wonderful wines. But there's a new thing called the chosen soils, terra electae. This is not in effect yet, but there's going to be a new Chianti Rufina called terra electae. Okay, some of you may be familiar that with the fact that Chianti used to be marketed in straw bottles. And you picture these women down by the river making straw for the straw bottles. It eventually reached the point where so much was being sold that they had to bring straw in from the Philippines and from other areas just to satisfy the demands for Chianti in straw, which is still out there. Chianti in fiasco, sometimes they call it in fiasco, but it's been replaced largely with Bordeaux bottles. But I thought I would mention that to you because Chianti is really a tapestry of historic, cultural, and geographic tradition in Tuscany. There are about 8 million cases of Chianti wines produced. That's all different designations of Chianti, sometimes called the Bordeaux of Italy because it's blended, just as many of the Bordeaux's are blended. Bordeaux's a much larger wine production area than Chianti, but 8 million cases is a lot. In Bordeaux, they could produce as much as 80 million cases of wine. It's phenomenal. It's all very good wine, 80% of which is red. There are some whites from Bordeaux. Chianti is all red. And there appear to be thousands of wineries in Chianti. I don't know if anyone has ever counted them. I've counted some of the specific areas. They say there are about 600 wineries in Chianti Classico. I don't know if that's true. I've seen surveys that say about 350, but many estates, many wineries. And the soil in Chianti Classico, there are a couple of types of soil that lend itself very well to production of Chianti wine. One is called galestro, and galestro is a limestone kind of a soil. In fact, for a brief period of time, there was a popular white called galestro. When the movement in Chianti went more and more to red wines, what were they going to do with their Malvasia and Trebbiano grapes? They had to do something with them. Eventually, they replanted most of them, but they produced this wine called Galestro. And it was popular for a few years, very light, very delicious, and very functional, but it wasn't really considered worthwhile to continue the Galestro projects for most producers. There's still some out there, but very little. Okay, there's also Albarese soil, which is a shale clay combination, and this works very well with Sangiovese. So the original formula by Baron Ricasoli in the 19th century for Chianti wine was Sangiovese, red, Canaiolo, red, Trebbiano and Malvasia, both white. Okay, but mostly recently, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Syrah have been planted in place of the white grape varieties. So Chianti is much more formidable now than it was when it was first created. Also, Chianti wine loves wood, and there are both large casks called botti grandi, oak or chestnut, mostly oak, and there are barrique, small French barrique. There's some American barrique in Tuscany and some barrique from Hungary and from other areas. And these barrique can be untoasted, lightly toasted. They're burned on the inside, so they impart a certain flavor, or heavily toasted. Depends on the winemaker. Depends on the winemaker. Generally, the ageability of Chianti is to drink them young. The inexpensive ones, the regular Chiantis. If you have a Chianti Reserva, that's considered to be a wine of 10 years or more, a wine of a decade. Okay, and there's a new designation for Chianti. We'll show that to you. I have to show you some wine pretty soon. You're not going to believe that there's any wine here if I don't show them to you. There's a new designation called Gran Selezione, which is really super Chianti Classico. You have Chianti and Chianti Classico. Chianti Classico is a subzone. There are many subzones, and we'll talk about some of those later on as well. Okay, so there may be as many as 100 million bottles of Chianti produced, 35 million of which are Chianti Classico. Brunello di Montalcino, 9 million bottles, much smaller production. Vino Nobile di Montepulciano, 6 million bottles. Morellino di Scanzano, 8 million bottles. So in some of these subzones, small productions are planted and made and are well worth searching out and finding them. Okay, what does Sangiovese mean? Sangue di Giove, or in Latin, sanguis Jovis, the blood of Jupiter. This is an ancient grape variety, very noble grape variety. And we spoke about this already being all over the world, in many provinces in Italy and in Corsica, Argentina, California, and other places as well, New Zealand and in Australia. Okay, I'd like to zero in on a couple of Chiantis, tell you a little something about them. Okay, and what am I going to show you first? Let me show you San Felice. I'll hold it up by my head. You don't feel like looking at me, you can look at this bottle. This is a Chianti Classico from San Felice Winery, which is not far from Siena, Castelnuovo Berardengo. And this was bought by the winery was bought by Allianz, which is sort of an insurance company. And what they did was they bought an entire village. They restored the village and they put in a chapel. The chapel was there, but they decorated it a bit more. It's a first-class hotel. They have something there that I think is unique and well worth your investigation. It's called a Vitiarium. And a Vitiarium is a place where grapes are grown. And they grow about 270 different varietals, not only Italian varietals, but varietals from other countries. And they try to show how these grape varieties grow in that Chianti Classico zone near Siena. And as a matter of fact, I'll show you another wine while we're waiting, a wine called Pugnitello. Pugnitello is a grape variety that was propagated in the Vitiarium of San Felice, and eventually they planted it, and they were able to produce enough to make a small quantity of Pugnitello wine. It's called Pugnitello, means a little fist, because the shape of the grape cluster is in the shape of a fist. And it's an excellent wine that you might want to search out. It's not Sangiovese. It's a separate grape, Pugnitello, okay? Grown only, as far as I know, by the San Felice winery, okay? But to get to the Chianti Classico, I just wanted to show you, you get most of the information, beautiful decorative label there, but it doesn't really tell you a whole lot. It tells you that it's a DOCG wine, Denominazione di Origine Controllata, San Felice. It tells you the vintage, 2022. You can hold on to this for 5 years or so, I think. I don't think there'll be a problem, okay? But it's a medium-bodied Chianti Classico, fresh on the palate, etc., elegant profile, smooth tannins, because the tendency of Sangiovese is to be too high in acidity and too tannic. But the winemakers know how to control that. Okay, but looking at the fine print here, so 13.5% alcohol. So I told you before it could be as little as 11.5%, but most of the wines are much more substantial. This is 13.5% alcohol. Okay, so again, this is something you might be able to find in a store. Pugnitello would be difficult to find, but you should be able to find many different wineries and estates from Chianti Classico in the wine shops. Okay, and regular Chianti as well. And I found one that I thought was interesting. It's called MB 1933, and it's made in the original formula with a couple of the white grape varieties. Okay, and it's actually a single hectare planted wine. A hectare is about 2.5 acres. So that's all there is to make this. It's very small production. I thought it's interesting that there are some people who still make the wine according to the original traditional formula. Okay. But most of it now is all red grape varieties. And one of these is, I got this bottle especially because it'll serve a couple of purposes. At least I think it serves a couple of purposes. Okay, it's made by Rufino. It's called Riserva Ducale. And where'd they get Ducale from? Well, there was a Duke of Aosta who came to the winery and selected certain barrels and said he wanted to have that wine. So they made this Riserva named after the Duke, the Ducale, the Duke's Riserva wine. And this is aged at the winery a minimum of 3 years, even more so, as a matter of fact. And I brought the half bottle to show you, because if you look at a half bottle and a full bottle, you can see the space where the cork is the same, but the amount of wine in contact with the cork varies. The half bottle is half the size of the full bottle. And as such, it will age more quickly. And we used to see a lot more half bottles in the wine shops. We don't see that many anymore, but it's perfect for one person or just two people who want to have a glass. But you want to drink these young and buy them one or two bottles at a time and test them, because some of the best wines are made in magnums, 3 liters, and in 750s, and don't even make a 375. But it's a very functional size, very, very good. Okay. I'll tell you a little something about the Rufino winery. They produce the Riserva Ducale. There may be as many as 100,000 cases of Riserva Ducale produced today. And they make a special Riserva Ducale called Gold Label Riserva Ducale d'Oro. And of that, they produce about 40,000 cases, which is the size of a very good French Bordeaux chateau. So it's quite a substantial amount of wine, but it's not overwhelming. Rufino Chianti may produce as much as 10 million bottles of wine. So it's a very, very important producer. And it goes back to the Rufino family in the 18th century. This was eventually purchased. The winery was purchased by the Culinary family, whom you may have heard about. Now it's owned by a multinational corporation, which is doing a very good job of getting Rufino wines well known throughout the world. Okay? If you want to find out more about these wines, two things that I would recommend. There's a website called Italian Wine Central, which will give you a lot of technical and statistical information on Italian wines. And there's also a group called Wine Folly, who produce books, maps, many different things. They're very with it. Young people know wine very well, and you can learn a lot from them. But I did want to mention that outside of Chianti Classico, and I mentioned Chianti Rufino already, there are other zones, and they are Chianti zones that are close to important cities in Tuscany. For example, the Colli, the hills of Aretini, that's close to Arezzo. So we're going a bit southeast now of Chianti Classico area. There's the hills of Florence, the Fiorentini, the hills of Pisa, Pisane. And these all have their own rules, their own little consortios that tell them how to make the wine, how to make it authentic. One that you will find in stores is the Colli Senesi, the Siena Hills. Senesi. That's a fairly large area, not as large as Chianti Classico, but fairly large. But the interesting thing about Colli Senesi is it's not far from where they make Vino Nobile di Montepulciano and Brunello di Montalcino. So very often the best grapes go into production of Brunello di Montalcino and Vino Nobile di Montepulciano. But Chianti from Colli Senesi is very good value. There's one zone called Montalbano, and they have a wonderful red wine called Carmignano. And you may not know this about Cabernet Sauvignon. The Italians in the area of Carmignano called it the Uva Francesca, the French grape variety. It was brought to Tuscany around 1700 or so by Caterina de' Medici, a Tuscan woman, wealthy, very super wealthy, married into the court of the French king, the King of France. She brought the Cabernet Sauvignon, or people brought the Cabernet Sauvignon back to Tuscany. There's also a lot of French grape varieties grown along the Tuscan coast, the sea coast, because part of Tuscany is the island of Elba. And Elba is where Napoleon was exiled. Now, I always tell everybody Napoleon was really Italian, but I'm not going to take credit for saying that. I reverse my stance. But he was from the island of Corsica, and the dialect of French in Corsica is very Italianate. And Napoleon Bonaparte's real name was Napoleone Bonaparte. So there is this connection between France and Italy and the coastal area. And when Napoleon was exiled, many French people came to the coastal area of Tuscany and planted Tuscan grape varieties. There's a new area of Chianti called Montespertoli. And this used to be part of the Colli Fiorentini, but they went off and started to make their own wines. And there's a new area, it hasn't really been set up yet, that's called the Terra di Vinci, around the village of Vinci, where the great scientist, Da Vinci artist, came from. Okay, but so Italy's moving more and more to smaller geographic designations. I think you'll see this. I'll tell you about that in my peroration. Well, it's about time we talked about a couple of the other wines from Tuscany, one of which is Brunello di Montalcino. And I know a little bit about Brunello di Montalcino. I used to work for the Biondi Santi family. And this Brunello di Montalcino, is actually made by Biondi Santi. It's made by I believe she's the great granddaughter of Ferruccio Biondi Santi, not affiliated with the Biondi Santi label. She has her own winery, her own production called Le Chiuse, which is an enclosure. And it's very nice wine. Someone gave it to me after I did a wine lecture. And I said, this is nice. I think it's worth $50, $75. I found out it's over $100 a bottle. And this particular one is a 2019. There are numbered bottles. This is a tradition in Biondi Santi to number the bottles. And again, a very, very good production. The producers in Montalcino rate their vintages 1 star, 2 stars, 3 stars, 4 stars, 5 stars. And in some vintages, they don't make any. They're able to make it just about every year. And you can find 5-star vintages out there. You want to hold on to them for a while. They say about Brunello di Montalcino, again, 100% Sangiovese. Regular wine is aged 4 years. The reserve is aged minimum of 5 years. And they say about Brunello di Montalcino, you can't afford them and your grandchildren have to drink them. Well, it's not really true that your grandchildren have to drink them. They make them in such a way that they're more approachable now. But they are pretty pricey. I mean, a bottle of Biondi Santi Brunello di Montalcino Reserva could be over $1,000 a bottle. And this was one of the wines that put Italy on the map because it was served by Queen Elizabeth, and the international community came to really like it a lot. Well, in 1888, Ferruccio Biondi Santi produced his first Brunello di Montalcino. And I had the good fortune to taste the 1888, also the 1891, 1921, 25, 45, and working our way up to approximate dates of today. Okay, and my favorites were the 1921, the 1891. Of course, I'll never get to taste them again, but that's okay. It's nice to have tasted them. Ferruccio Biondi Santi actually fought with Giuseppe Garibaldi in the 1860s helping to start the country of Italy. So it's a very important historical personage. And his family owned Biondi Santi for years and years. Now I think it's owned by a multinational company. But at any rate, Biondi Santi is sort of the first name in Brunello di Montalcino. Okay, now the wines will hold up. We know Brunello can age more than 20, 30 years, but the corks don't hold up. Eventually, the wine will eat its way through the cork. So what they have to do, what they do at Biondi Santi, is they have to, for people who buy cases of their wines and have maybe 1945 at home or 1970 at home, and they want a fresh cork. They want to make sure that the wine doesn't become vinegar. So they can bring it to the winery, send it to the winery, and the winery extracts the cork, puts in a new cork, tops it with a little bit of the original vintage, puts in the new cork, and then puts a bit of lead tied around the capsule. And this will preserve the wine for another 20, 30 years or so. This process is called the ricolmatura. And as far as I know, certain places in Bordeaux do this, and also they do this at Biondi Santi. So it's something very, very special, and it's a very, very special wine. Okay, about 9 million bottles produced. That sounds like a lot, but it really isn't a lot. There are probably around 200, 250 producers. Many of them only produce a small amount of wine. And the Brunello di Montalcino is a real special occasion wine. You may want to taste a Gran Selezione wine from Chianti Classico together with the Brunello di Montalcino. Or you may want to taste Chiantis from the different zones, Chianti Colicinese versus a Chianti Classico. Chianti lends itself very well to entertainment and to tasting. Goes great with any red meats, any tomato sauces, things like that. Okay. I should mention that most of the Brunello di Montalcinos are what we call vine loaded. They may have as many as 5,000 grape plants planted per hectare. Okay, so this causes a production of smaller amounts of fruit, but higher quality fruit, because it's called vine loading. And there are different clones of Sangiovese. The one that was preferred by Biondi Santi was the BS11 clone. And other wineries are making wine from BS11. Also, you know, the phylloxera, which was a wine louse that devastated the wines of Europe, also devastated the wines of Tuscany. So Brunello di Montalcino, Chianti Classico, all of these wines are grafted onto American rootstock because American rootstock is protected against this phylloxera wine louse, this bug that likes to eat up the roots and destroy the plant of the grape. So interesting. It shows to me, it's philosophical, shows our interconnection in the wine world. There's a saying, rivers separate people, wine unites people. I really believe that's true. It's a drink of hospitality. And you can see that American rootstock, European grapevines, we're all interconnected. Okay. So we'll leave Montalcino and we'll go to the town of Montepulciano, which is, again, south in Tuscany, not far from Umbria. And they produce a wine there called Vino Nobile de Montepulciano. And there's a story on this. I know I drive you crazy, but I think you like some of the stories. So I'll tell you the story. There was a poet named Francesco Redi, and he wrote in around 1685 a work called Bacchus in Tuscany, that the wines of the town of Montepulciano were the most noble of the wines. And as it winds up, Adamo Fanetti started to make wines. I believe it was in the beginning of the 20th century, around the time of the First World War. And he decided to get a trademark on Vino Nobile de Montepulciano. He was recreating a wine according to the ideas of this poem by Francesco Redi. Okay. Well, sooner or later, other people started to make the wine in the same way, and they started to call their wine Nobile. And a judge in Italy decided that as long as the wine was from that general area, from that Montepulciano area, they could call their wine Vino Nobile. So now they just call it Nobile. And there are about 80 wineries. There aren't a lot of wineries. 76 of them are members of the consortio, the little local group that helps to regulate wine production. And it's good. They call the Vino Nobile the poor man's Brunello di Montalcino, whereas Brunello is 100% Sangiovese. This more or less follows the formula for blending that we see in Chianti Classico. So they call the grape variety in this area Brunello Gentile, that's the Sangiovese, and they use other grape varieties, including Mamolo and a couple of other grape varieties. Produce about 6 million bottles a year. And a Reserva of Vino Nobile de Montepulciano is aged at the winery a minimum of 3 years. Okay, so it's like a younger relative of Brunello di Montalcino. Well worth the search. Not as easy to find as a Brunello or Chianti Classico, but well worth the search. I don't have a bottle to show you, but when you get close to the coast, there's a wine produced from Sangiovese called Morellino di Scanzano. And again, the Sangiovese grape is called Morellino, which means little blackberry. Grapes are small, very compact, very powerful. They produce young, fruity wines. There is a Reserva, which is aged a minimum of 24 months, but most of the Morellino di Scanzano that you find in the marketplace is the younger, regular Normale Morellino di Scanzano. There are about 350 producers of Morellino di Scanzano. And again, not a lot of it produced, but very worthwhile. Wines are made on the island of Elba. Okay, you can find those. And there's a little gem made in the Scanzano area called Parina. This is one of my favorites. It's not easy to find. Parrina. It's made pretty much like Morellino di Scanzano. It's a small estate owned by an aristocratic woman. And I met her, and she's very charming. And her agent is Barbara Durham, who was a student from Stanford who went to Italy and married Baron Durham. And she has a portfolio of many fine producers. One of them is Parina. So I'll see if I can finagle a bottle of Parina out of her or out of somebody, because it's really, really worthwhile. But the winery also has a farm, and they have cows, and they produce cheese. And they have a cheese shop in Rome. And every day they send fresh cheese from southern Tuscany along the coast down to Rome to their cheese facility. Okay, so you can see the olive oil, the cheese, the grape varieties, all of them are interrelated. It's an agricultural business. And that's really all I wanted to say about Tuscany 1. I'll be back to speak about the other wines of Tuscany, wines that are really not based on Sangiovese, but based on other important grape varieties. So we'll do a Tuscany number 2 pretty soon. I think what you're going to see in the Chianti area going forward is that there will be more attention given to smaller subzones. You'll see wines identified by villages, Grape, Castellina and Chianti, etc. These are really not that prominent on labels anymore. Let's see what the Gran Selezione says. Gran Selezione talks about a single vineyard. You're going to see more and more of these as well. The Vigna del Capanino, okay? Very nice little single vineyard. And it's from Castellina in Chianti. You can read the fine print. What I'm saying is, I think in the future, you're going to see Castellina in Chianti in larger print. You're going to see Rada in larger print. Just as the French in Bordeaux call their wines, their Medocs, Saint Estèphe, Saint Julien, all of the other villages in the area, Margaux, etc. I think that's what's coming. I don't think production levels on Chianti will drop because Chianti is so popular, but I think more and more finer and finer versions of Chianti, Chianti Classico, are going to be produced. And there aren't a lot of Gran Selezione bottles available, but they're really special. And one thing that I think would be very nice is to taste Brunello di Montalcino in a comparison to Gran Selezione. Okay. And that's all I wanted to say about Tuscany 1. So thank you for listening. And I look forward to seeing you again to talk about Tuscany 2 and the rest of Italy. We have a long way to go. We have to get down to southern Italy and then go to the two islands. So you'll be stuck with me for a while. So enjoy your time, drink good wine. Wine unites us. Thanks very much.